Ever wondered if all of human history follows a single, predictable path? You know, like some kind of master plan? Well, back in the 19th century, this powerful theory called classical evolutionism popped up, and it tried to do just that, create what many saw as a universal science of culture. Today, we're going to dive into what this theory was, why it was so incredibly influential, and ultimately, why it all came crashing down.
At its heart, the theory asked this exact question, and for the folks who came up with it, the answer was a loud and confident yes. They truly believed that every single society on Earth was on the same track, just at different points along the way. Some were at the bottom, some were in the middle, and one, of course, was right at the very top.
All right, so here's our roadmap for this. First, we'll build the theory up. What was its goal? What were the core principles? And how did its creators try to map out, well, all of human society? Then we're going to watch it all fall apart, looking at its fatal flaws and exploring what came next.
Okay, let's get into it. The ambition behind this whole ladder of progress idea was just enormous. I mean, this was an age of major scientific discovery, and thinkers wanted to find the grand, unifying laws of human history, kind of like physicists had found the laws of nature.
See, they weren't just trying to describe different cultures. They were aiming to create a predictive science. They believed they could chart a single, straight line, that's the unilinear pattern, that would explain the development of every single culture, from its simplest beginnings all the way to its most complex state. Now, for a theory this big, you need some seriously powerful core ideas, right? And classical evolutionism was built on a foundation of 3 key principles that seem to explain pretty much everything. Let's break them down.
First up, and this is the big one, is the idea of unilinear evolution. This is the ladder. The theory said that every culture in the world had to pass through the exact same stages in the exact same order. No detours, no skipping steps, progress was a one-way street, and it always went from simple to complex.
But wait a minute. How could societies on totally opposite sides of the world, with zero contact, suddenly develop similar tools or beliefs? Well, their answer was something they called the psychic unity of mankind. This is the idea that all human minds are basically wired the same way. So if you're faced with similar problems at a similar stage of development, you'll naturally and independently invent similar solutions. Things like agriculture or pottery, for example.
And how could they prove that advanced societies had actually passed through those earlier stages? They looked for what they called survivals. These are like cultural fossils, old habits or beliefs that stick around long after their original purpose is gone. Think about superstitions or weird old sayings. Evolutionists like E.B. Tylor saw these as direct proof of what the earlier, simpler stages of their own cultures must have looked like.
So, with these principles locked in, anthropologists set out to do something incredibly audacious: create these huge, comprehensive maps of all human history, charting the evolution of absolutely everything: religion, family, government, the whole shebang.
Take E.B. Tylor's famous theory on religion, for instance. He argued it evolved in this super neat 3-step process. It starts with animism, the belief that everything has a soul or a spirit. From there, it evolves into polytheism, which is the worship of many gods. And finally, it reached what he saw as the most advanced stage, monotheism, the belief in one single all-powerful God.
But maybe no one was more ambitious than the American anthropologist Lewis Henry Morgan. He wanted to create a master chart for all of human society. And for him, the ultimate measuring stick, the test of progress, was technology.
And here it is. Look at this detailed system. Morgan split all of human history into 3 big periods: savagery, barbarism, and civilization, with little substages for the first 2. And as you can see, every single jump to a new stage is marked by a huge technological innovation. You couldn't get to barbarism without pottery, and you absolutely couldn't reach civilization without writing. For them, it was a clear, ordered, and, seemingly scientific progression.
Now, on paper, this all looked incredibly logical, right? But there was a massive, massive problem hiding in plain sight. It wasn't really with the theory itself, but with how these thinkers were getting their information in the first place.
And this is the moment the whole project just starts to unravel. The systems were elegant. The stages were crystal clear. But the foundation it was all built on was completely unstable.
So the first domino to fall was the method. Later critics gave it a name that just perfectly captures the problem: armchair anthropology.
So what does that even mean? It means these hugely influential theorists, guys like Taylor and Morgan, rarely, if ever, left their offices or their armchairs to actually go live with and observe the cultures they were writing about.
Instead, they just relied on secondhand accounts from missionaries, colonial officials, and travelers. And these sources were often super biased, incomplete, or sometimes just flat out wrong. Their grand theories were built on data that was, as one critic said, empirically flawed.
But, a shaky research method was only part of the problem. As we dig a little deeper, we find a much more serious issue baked right into the very core of classical evolutionism.
And that issue is ethnocentrism. It's the tendency we all have to view the world through the lens of our own culture and judge everybody else by our standards. For these classical evolutionists, though, this wasn't just a tendency, it was their guiding principle. Their own 19th century European and American society was always defined, either directly or indirectly, as the final, highest stage of human achievement: civilization.
And this bias showed up everywhere. Other cultures weren't just seen as different, they were labeled savage or primitive. They were viewed as being left behind in the race of progress. And it's really no coincidence that this theory became popular during the height of colonialism. It gave a convenient, scientific-sounding reason for the idea that Western powers had a right, maybe even a duty, to govern other peoples who were supposedly at a lower stage of development. The critic James Ferguson asked a question that just cuts right through the entire theory. From whose point of view can one society be seen as higher than another? And really, the evolutionists never had a good answer, because their standard was always simply themselves. So, here's the crucial point. With its methods totally discredited and its deep-seated bias exposed, the ladder of progress was toppled. Anthropology had to find a completely new way to think about human diversity.
And this slide right here really illustrates that huge shift in thinking. The old view saw other cultures as living fossils of our own past, but the modern view sees them as genuinely different, incredibly complex systems in their own right. The goal isn't to rank and classify cultures on a single ladder anymore. It's to understand the incredible variety of human experience on its own terms.
And this idea became the new foundation for anthropology. Every single culture is a valid expression of human life, and each one deserves to be studied with respect for its own history, its own logic, and its own values, not just as some relic of a forgotten era.
And that leaves us with a final, much trickier question. If we throw out that simple single ladder of progress, what do we replace it with? If history isn't just a straight line leading to one specific destination, then what does it really mean for a society to change, to develop, or to advance? That's a question we are still grappling with today.